boots? They are bright red. And I think probably about a month ago, I would never be wearing these boots because I did not think that 50-year-old ladies wore red cowboy boots. And so this past week, I turned 50 on Tuesday, and I was out shopping with my daughter, Helen, who's 11, and we were just, shopping, not for anything in particular, which is what most girls and women do. And we were at the mall, and I came across the boots. And so I put the boots on, and I took the boots off. And then I put the boots on, and then I took the boots off, and I finally decided not to get the boots. And so magically, the boots appeared the following day, and my daughter, Helen, had purchased them for me. And so I must read to you the inscription on the bottom of the boots. So on this one, it says, "I love you so, so, so much. Know there is more age to love now." Love, Helen. And so I think it's really interesting because I think that kids probably have this whole ageism, sexism, racism thing. I mean, they don't have it. So clearly, I think children teach us what we need to know rather than the other way around. And so what I'm going to do with you today is simply share with you the story. And actually, it's all of us have this story somehow woven in with what we do and who we are. But I'm going to share with you my story. And so it starts in 1971. I was 11. And what's really funny, I was in Michigan not too long ago with a bunch of kids. There was an audience full of little girls and their families. And I said, "So how old does that make me now?" And the smallest of little girls in the audience raises her hand, tiny little thing. And I said, "Okay, honey, how old does that make me now?" I was 11 in 1971. She goes, 76. And I was like, "Right on, sister. You just keep raising that hand and acting like you know what you're doing, honey. That's how you get raises." So the story starts in 1971. I was 11, and I grew up right here in Charlotte. And so my parents moved me from a public school. I was moved over to a private school. And, not that in itself is that remarkable, except that this is at this critical time of adolescence where our bodies are changing. And I think there's pretty much this cultural thing where suddenly we just don't feel like we fit in. We somehow feel very different. And I'm going to bet that every one of the presenters here, maybe everyone in this room, has experienced what I'm talking about. So I started at this new school, and I was one of 3 new students. And frankly, I felt incredibly invisible. And so about 3 weeks into the school year, it was announced that we'd have to run the mile for PE. And I've always been a tomboy. From the very day of my birth, came out kicking and screaming. And so I was so excited about this because suddenly I would no longer be like Molly, the invisible new girl. I'd be Molly, the runner girl, the one that sort of like just had some sort of identity. So to sort of paint the portrait for you, if anybody in this room is 45 or over, I think there's a few of us in here. In 1971, girls did not, this was kind of Title IX-ish time, girls did not have appropriate gym wear. We had to wear something called the greenie. And the greenie was basically this one-piece prison suit that girls had to wear. And the shorts were here, and it snapped up the front. And it was, if you took a long step of any length, you'd have this massive wedgie. And they were not built for running. So I show up with my greenie, my tube socks, and my tree-torn tennis shoes. And my PE teacher yells, "Go!" And so I take off running. And I'm like passing the guy, all the girls. And now I'm coming into lap 2 of a 4-lap mile track. And I step in this huge hole, and I twisted my ankle, and I came sort of, stumbling back to the PE teacher and told her that I'd hurt it. I couldn't go on anymore. And she said to me, which was probably in a very kind voice, what she said was, "Honey, why don't you sit here while everybody else finishes?" But interestingly, that's not what I heard. What I heard her say was, "Why don't you sit here while everybody else finishes?" And that is this critical point, that a phrase that I've coined, or we've coined where I work, called the girl box. And it's this place that formerly vibrant, like really alive creatures called children begin to morph into who they think they should be instead of who they are. And the interesting thing is that the whole thing is one big lie, that they're absolutely fabulous and amazing and miraculous just the way they are. But for some reason, it's like the entire world, the earth, our culture, society, somehow is so afraid of that raw and real and authentic, that we begin to some reason want to twist it around and control all of that vibrancy. And so I stepped into the girl box, not knowing at that point that it really was a choice, that I didn't have to do it. And so I stepped in. And I can remember not wanting to go, and I felt somewhat of this light that was me begin to dim. And so my mother, who was just this amazing spirit, on the exodus from her own girl box at age 48, 49, began to run. And if I could just paint a portrait of this lady, she was just amazing. She was about 5'10". Her hair made her like 6'1". And it was like fabulous hair out of a red, box, and she dyed it herself. It was brilliant. And she would put on her like golf skirt and these fabulous little socks with a little golf ball on the back, and her tree torns and her polyester darted shirt with the collar, and she would go run. And I can remember hearing the screen door slam, and off she would go. And she would come back, and this woman, this southern, beautiful, gracious woman, would be sweating profusely with it just dripping on the kitchen floor as she prepared breakfast for me and my dad. And one morning she said, "Would you like to go with me?" And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. What is that about? There was something magical about all that sweat. And so I joined her. And I will tell you now that the seeds of what I do and what I wish for each of you and every child that I ever touch was birthed on those runs with my mother. Before the sunrise, and just the sound of the birds and our breath in sync with one another, and our feet on the pavement and the noise of the leaves at autumn and the sweat at summer, and the two of us wouldn't have to say a word, and there we were, one and separate all at the same time. And so the other thing, that was about the age of 11 or 12, I discovered what running meant to me, and it isn't about the physicalness of it or what it does for our bodies or the cardiovascular functioning. What it did was give me sanctuary and solitude and a place to connect with my divine. It's where I find clarity, and I still find it there. So the other thing that happened about the age of 15 was I come from a long lineage. Like if we had my whole chart up here of my family, you'd see a lot of very thin, athletic people. You'd also see a lot of really good drinkers. And so at age 15, I took my first drink. And I was at my friend Beth's house, and after several, of those, I called this guy named Robbie. And he went to like the heathen public school, and I told Robbie that I loved him. And Robbie didn't know who I was, but by the end of the conversation with him, he did know who I was, and so did all of his buddies, and there was something incredibly powerful about that, It's like those cultural messages that said the quick fix and the quick way to feeling good about yourself will work. And what I didn't realize at the time was that it was part of the plan, it was part of the lie, it was part of the way to dim the miraculous spirit that was me and you and all of us. And so these two worlds began to build momentum, and step by step the running improved, and I began to get competitive at it, because you can't just run because, you have to run for a reason, you have to run to compete, you have to run to achieve, you can't just run because. And so too did the drinking and the dark nights and a lot of really dark spaces. And so on July 6, 1993, I was 32 years old, I hit bottom. The running was no longer working, and I could not find solitude or sanctuary in that space. I couldn't find it anywhere. And so I called my big sister, Emily, and I told her I had two choices. I was either going to move to California, which is like the geographic here, or I was going to kill myself. And I asked my sister, Emily, which one should I pick? And she paused, and then she gave me the greatest advice of anything I've ever received, and I'd heard it before, but it really worked. And she said, "Molly, this too shall pass." And so I hung up the phone, and I sort of fell to the side, and I went to sleep. And the next day was July 7th, 1993. And I decided later on in the day, I called in sick to the job that I was holding at the time, and I decided to go for a run. And there was this huge thunderstorm brewing off in the distance, massive clouds, electricity and lightning, and all sorts of just ions in the air. And so I put on my running clothes, and I remember thinking, it's too dangerous, don't go, don't go. And in among all the noises of all the shoulds and oughts, and you're not good enough or pretty enough or thin enough or whatever enough, came this one little voice. And this voice said, if you need to go, go. And so I remember descending those stairs, and about 5 miles into what ended up being a 6-mile run, something happened. And, for me to try to frame it into words does it a disservice. But there was something that happened. It was like the way the sweat came out of my pores and trickled down my chest and down my back, and the weight of my ponytail as it tugged behind me. And there was this spot at the intersection of Kenilworth and East Boulevard where I just felt nothing. It was as if there was no story, there was no should, there was no ought, there was nothing. It was as if I was just invisible, but in the most glorious way. The story disappeared. The whatever I should be was no longer there, and I just was. And so I burst into tears, and I walked home. And I knew that once I had experienced that, I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to living the way that I had lived. That, something had changed. And I couldn't articulate what it was, but I knew that it had changed. And I didn't know what to do, so I just let it sit and let it marinate for a while. And then I got married, and I had a child. And when I gave birth to my son, it was like the purpose, what I was here for, began to reveal itself in the quiet times as I would nurse him. And so Girls on the Run, this thing that I wanted to do, something to help girls feel and know that they are safe to be themselves, no matter what our culture or no matter what their context is, no matter how they see it, they are safe and beautiful and whole just the way they are. And so I wrote out this curriculum, and I went to the school where I had my spill, and I'll never forget, going to meet with the after-school coordinator. I said, all right, I'd like to do this thing called Girls on the Run. And his response, and he's a good friend of mine still, he said, oh, that sounds cute. And I can remember thinking, cute? This is going to be a species-level transformational shift in the way girls and women perceive themselves. Like we're going to obliterate sexism and eliminate the objectification of women from across the globe. I really had that thought in my head, and yet I couldn't have said it then. I enjoy saying it now. But I couldn't have said it then, and so what do? You go right back to default mode, which felt a lot safer, so I probably did a little something like this. Now it is. Can we do it? He said yes. And so 13 girls arrived the following month. And I'll tell you right now that if you are at all ever questioning what it is that you're supposed to do or where you're supposed to land, I felt like this when those girls came. That's exactly the way that it felt. And if you ever question or wonder what it is you're supposed to do, if it makes you go like that, you're probably supposed to do it. And so the program has since grown. 13 little girls told 13 other little girls, and then we had 26, and then there were 75. And it's just been an amazing thing for me to realize that so many of us, whether we are third grade or 70 or male or female or old or young or left-brained or right-brained, we just want to know that we are loved. And so the program is now in 174 cities across North America. And there were... Last year, we reached the 250,000 mark in the number of girls served. And at this point, I'm feeling very called to expand to other nations. And we have 40 or so that have expressed an interest, not quite sure what to do with that yet from a business standpoint. But what I'd like to do, just sort of to launch and to sort of get you thinking, is just share with you one story about a very special girl. And her name is Shakira. And so I was coaching a group of little girls, this was several years ago, and we limit it to 15 girls in a group. And at this point, I had 14. And we start the day, the first activity, with you say your name and an adjective that describes you. And so I'm always like Miraculous Molly. And we go around the circle, and we got around to this one little girl who just shook her head and looked to the ground. And one of the other girls goes, oh, that's just Shakira. She never talks. And I was like, all right, girl, I'm just glad you're here. You just keep coming back, girl. Just keep coming back. And so the next lesson she comes and she doesn't speak, and the third lesson she comes and she doesn't speak, and the fourth lesson she comes and she doesn't speak. And so I went to the school counselor and I said, could you please help me? I don't know how to reach this little girl. And she said to me, well, Molly, if you look closely about her calves and her thighs, you'll see the scars from the cigarette burns. And this little girl had been cast away in closets for long periods of time, so she had to wear glasses that would dim in the sunlight. And I realized at that moment that I was privileged, actually, to have her in my life. And so over the course of the next 12 weeks, I began to see something emerge, like the light that had dimmed within this child and the story that she'd been told her entire 9 years of life. You're not worthy, you're not smart enough, or you're not worth it, or you're voiceless, was beginning to unravel and disappear. And at the end of the program, she was participating but still not speaking. So on the very last day of the program, I put the girls into a circle and I said, all right, ladies, let's just say one word to describe our experience, hoping that this might be the day I would hear something from her. And so the first little girl said, fantastic. Somebody said, awesome. I do remember one 8-year-olds go supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, because when you're 8, that's like, the most official, longest word in the English language. And then I got around to Shakira, and she just looked around the circle, and then she shook her head and looked to the ground. So the following day, we have our banquet, where all the kids come together, and we celebrate and honor them for their presence over the 12 weeks. And I had called every one of the girls up, and I called Shakira up. And we give funny awards like the Sweat Goddess Award or the Runs with a Red Face Award. And I had called Shakira up, all 13 of her teammates behind her. And I call her up, and I say, all right, girl, I give you the Grand Communicator Award. Because of how you communicate, that little sparkle in your eye. And, you communicate in ways that are so much richer than many adults. And that little girl pulled out of her pocket a card, and she handed me that card. And I read it. And I will tell you that in a room of 60 people, I felt great solitude and a great connection to my divine, like I did on that July 7th run. And I handed that card back to her. And I said, will you read this to me? And that little 9-year-old took that card, and she began to shake and shake. And when you're really thin and you haven't been nourished for a long time, you do like this. And then she read it out loud. And what she said was, dear Molly, the word I wanted to say on the last day of Girls on the Run was love. Your friend Shakira. And so my question to you, and I just really, really ask you this question, what do you want to say? And what stories do you tell yourself that limit you from saying what it is you need to say to the world? And I say, if Shakira can do it, you can do it. And if it includes bright red boots, you better go get you some. That's it.